Hi.
Morning.
Morning. Has the sun risen wherever you are?
Barely. It's all nasty and rainy though.
Right. Just happened.
Do we have our note taker
Yeah, Eric.
present?
Not yet, but he said he would do it.
I know. I saw he said he was doing to do it. Might want to reach out to him and
Yeah.
check in. Be right back. All right. Ready to get the show on the road?
Cool. Okay. Yeah, Eric says he's here. So
Okay. Well, great. He must just not have Privs.
I'm gonna click broadcast.
Launch it. Morning.
Morning. I see people slowly trickling in. Maybe we'll give people like 30 more seconds before we get started. I just added the link to the Google Doc where we have our notes for today. So definitely check that out as we go along this call, because I've added a lot of good links to PRs and Gitter posts and things like that. And I guess we should start by introducing ourselves. I just thought about that, Spencer.
Seems like a good idea.
Yeah, but I'm Machiko. I'm one of the community engineers here at Reaction, and right now my job is to work on documentation and also hosting these community calls to help people working on Reaction and giving people a peek into what we're working on, and also getting an idea of what other people are working on, what troubles they're having. So that's me. Spencer, do you want to?
I'm Spencer. I'm the other community engineer. I've been leading up the marketplace project lately, trying to get that out, which is our release 1.5 branch, if you've been following along with that. So that's kind of my main focus right now, but also excited to hang out and answer any questions and talk about where we're going. This is going to be a really exciting week, I think. So what's next for us, Machiko?
Awesome. So we start off the call with the latest things from Reaction, and we try to talk about what's been going on in Reaction for the next 2 weeks. And then we will go into a section about updates from the open source community. And that's where we talk about different PRs and plugins that people have been working on outside of Reaction. And then in the last, I guess, third or fourth of the call, you'll have a chance to do an open Q&A. So that's how we do these calls. So Spencer, do you want to start with
just to remind people though, because we've kind of switched to a new format in the last couple episodes, we'll call them. How should people submit questions for that Q&A?
So you can do that by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you're using the desktop app. I'm pretty sure if you're using the iPhone or Android app, you can also submit Q&A questions through there. Or feel free to also enter in a question in the chat. You can do that by clicking the chat button and then make sure that you open up the question or your chat to all panelists, because we want to all be able to see the question. And when I say everybody, I mean like not just the panelists, but also everybody here. So, yeah. Hi, Aaron.
Good morning.
Awesome. So, yeah, Spencer, do you want to get started with the latest from Reaction, with our latest release?
Jump into it. So last night my time, maybe your morning, who knows? I don't really know exactly where all of you are, but I pushed the release candidate 1. So this is v1.5.0-rc.1 on my Monday night, which would have been about 2 days ago. I pushed release candidate 0. So we're in a cycle right now where we are finishing up this release 1.5.0 branch. We are pushing fairly hard right now, trying to knock out all of the bugs associated with this branch. And just to remind people kind of what we're focused on for this 1.5 release, this is going to be kind of our alpha marketplace release, which I think Aaron's been mentioning for quite some time. We're trying to get the alpha version of marketplace out. There are people, such as the Artlines team, that have been using Reaction as a marketplace for some time. But what we're trying to do is push this broader release out to the community so that everyone can really install and use marketplace without too much customization needed. But I guess going back to what our goal is for this 1.5 release, we're shooting to have 0 regressions on the upgrade path. So if you have a 1.0 release, a 1.1, 1.2, etc., all the way up to the 1.4.4 that we are currently at, you can upgrade from one of those releases to Reaction 1.5 without experiencing any regressions. So that's goal number 1. Goal number 2 is we have just an enormous number of new features that we're introducing in this that are both for kind of a marketplace multi-shop setup as well as a single shop setup. So our second goal is to make sure that all of these new features that we've introduced actually work. So they all work mostly, but as we're kind of going through and testing everything, we're finding just a few bugs, and so we're trying to squash all of those bugs that are on existing features or new features before we release. And then the third goal for this is to be able to enable some amount of marketplace functionality. We're not pushing too hard to make sure that every single part of the app is marketplace ready. And there's a lot of marketplace work we're going to have to do as soon as 1.5 is released. But we need to get this out the door so that we can get back on a more regular release schedule. For those of you who are using Reaction in production, this is a place where it can be incredibly helpful for us if you test some of these release candidates and let us know kind of what breaks for you. This is really our only period of time we're going to have where there's release candidate software and people who can test it maybe in your staging environment or however that you test your environment before pushing new versions. We rely on that feedback pretty heavily as we don't actually use Reaction in production on a day-to-day basis. We're hoping to eliminate all the bugs either way. But again, your feedback would be super helpful there. Another thing that we're working on, just looking at Machiko's list, there is a link in her document to all of the different tasks. So anything that has the marketplace-v 1.5.0 label is currently scheduled for, issue resolution before we release this new branch, or before we release 1.5. So if you're curious kind of what is between right now, today, and us actually releasing it, which I've seen that question several times in Gitter, and I don't like to commit too hard in public to an actual release date because things can change. But again, I think the date is soon. And that list of tags, which does grow as we find new bugs and does shrink as we eliminate bugs, is our kind of issue tracker for what we see as things that need to be finished before we can release. I also have seen, and feel free to jump in here, Machiko, if I'm going off the rails, but I've also seen a number of jQuery complaints and issues lately. And that's probably due to us not communicating a change as well as we could have. So I don't know really what we should have done instead. We pushed it up as a commit. So if you're on the marketplace branch and you saw that and it broke something you've been using, I apologize. I think that's kind of the nature of pre-release software in some ways, but jQuery still exists in Reaction. We just removed the non-Meteor kind of global version of jQuery. So if you're experiencing some issues, I would say try to use the Meteor version of jQuery, which you can use by importing $ from Meteor/jQuery. That worked to fix an internal bug we had, and I imagine it would work for you. jQuery is still installed, so I don't see why it wouldn't. But if that's not working for you, file an issue and we can try to look into it.
Yep. So thanks for all the community members that have been, even before we put up our release candidate 1.5, a lot of people have been testing on the marketplace branch and sending us issues through there, and that's been really helpful for us to figure out, what's working, what's not, and where our testing blind spots were. So thanks for that, and thanks for
I have to say, I think from my perspective, this past 2 weeks has been one of the more active periods we've had since I joined the team back in April. We've been releasing a lot of code. There's been a lot of PRs closed, a lot of PRs opened, but also I think the number of PRs that have been merged from the community is near its high point as well, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking from the docs side, we've had great contributions to the docs from community members, and also just a lot of great conversation in Gitter. So we definitely appreciate that. There's one other update. I'm not sure that this made it into 1.5, but talking about the registry, the new provides, I guess, key in the registry accepts an array of strings. Spencer, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I know I've pushed all of you at my blog posts in the past, and And there's a blog post here that talks about, what is provides and how does the registry work. So provides is how we kind of define within a plugin which parts of the plugin go where in the app. How does the app know that your component or your template or your shipping method or whatever it is, your payment method, how does the app know where to put those things? And the answer is provides. So provides up until this PR that Machiko is talking about, 2930, provides permitted only a string, which would allow you to provide or set like each registry entry as a single reaction app, or a single, the plugin could do a single thing at once. And if you needed it to do multiple things, you needed multiple registry entries. In addition, it was hard to say, hey, this provides payment for multi-shop functionality as well as single shop functionality, or this other payment provider only provides single shop functionality. So this update, very simple, but it changes provides to accept an array of strings instead of just a string. So if you're maintaining your own plugins, I'd recommend going on and updating your plugins to use the array. There is some migrations in the app that will update those for you if you commit them to an old or if you upgrade from an older version of a plugin. But what this will permit us to do is have certain plugins that maybe have a marketplace version or a marketplace support, as well as single shop, and maybe some plugins that say provides marketplace payments but not payments. So this will allow us to kind of sort through our different plugins and the apps that those plugins provide in a little more nuanced way. And I think it'll give us a lot more control when using the registry to define different parts of the app.
Awesome. So next up, I wanted to move into the coming up section. That's where we talk about like events and other things going on at Reaction in the next 2 weeks. And our biggest thing that we just announced on the blog last week is that we have, for the month of October all the way until mid-December, we have this new thing called the Reaction Hack a Bug-a-thon. And you might be familiar with things like Hacktoberfest or other kind of like promotions during the month of October and more for working on an open source project. But for us at Reaction, we're giving out these cool prizes like bags and shirts and socks. Reaction
socks are so cool. Those socks
for people that work on pull requests, both features and bugs. From now until December 15th. Sorry. So to get the official details, definitely check out the blog post, which I'll link to here. Yeah.
So Machiko, what does somebody have to do to get like a sweet pair of socks or a bag, or kind of what are the different types of contributions we're looking for?
Yeah, so the first thing I would do is to check our issues page and look at anything with the pull requests encouraged label. Those are the first things I would look for. And you can either decide to work on a bug or a feature, whichever you feel like doing. And when you're done working on that, you can make a pull request. And I've also updated our pull request kind of like process guide, which I will post here, which talks about kind of what happens when you make a pull request to Reaction. So we can go over that real quick. Once you make a pull request to Reaction, a few things kind of happen automatically. We use these third-party tools called BitHound and CircleCI to run linting. So that's the equivalent of running like ESLint in your command line. And then we run reaction tests for all your tests. These happen all automatically as soon as you make a PR and submit it. And we also check for whether dependencies are not failing and any security vulnerabilities are introduced. There are more details about our kind of linting rules and stuff in our new style guide, which I'll get to later. Every Monday, the core team, so that's the reaction team, triages all new pull requests. So we're definitely checking all new pull requests that are coming in. And there are a few things that we check for manually as well. Like we want to see that you've made, for example, JS doc comments on any new methods, making sure that the naming conventions of variables, method names, folders, and packages are all kind of follow our guide. And anywhere where we're confused about what's going on in the code, we'd love to see comments in the code or comments in the PR, screenshots in the PR, and a link to the issue that you worked on in the PR as well. If you would like to get feedback or have questions about your PR, but it's not quite finished yet, you could still feel free to push up your pull request with a work in progress or WIP in the titles so that we know that you're not done yet, but you have a few questions. Like you can ask a question on a specific line and tag the @reaction core team. So that's what happens that's sort of what happens behind the scenes when a pull request happens. And yeah, to go back to the Hackabugathon rules, we're gonna be going through all the PRs, and anybody, for each unique PR during October through December 15th, you'll be entered into a raffle to win a grand prize of $500. I guess that's US dollars as a Visa card. And then that means that the more pull requests you close, the more pull requests you make, the more entries you'll get. And then we'll be giving away kind of like our grand $500 prize to the best pull request as determined by the team. All you have to do is to make sure that you fill out this form so that we can get your address and details on how to send your prize. And we will do that. So yeah,
Okay.
definitely check out the swag.
Let's talk about those socks. What do I have to do to get some socks?
Yeah, so just wait, how do you get a socks actually? I don't even know the actual rules.
All socks go to me.
Aaron gets all the socks. These are very fair rules.
Judges' rules.
We just want everybody to know, everybody in the community to know that these rules are unbiased, and that even if Aaron wins all the socks, it's just because he had all the best commits.
Oh yeah, no, so I think everybody who has a PR that gets merged into master will get some swag, which includes socks. So
everybody gets something.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's
it's a really good chance to get into it.
Your chances of winning are good.
Yes, very good. And yeah, the other community note is that, and this goes jumping a little bit down into the notes, but we noticed last week that there is a new meetup group, like a Reaction Commerce meetup group, the very first one that we know about in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So definitely join, or if you're on vacation in Argentina at some point, be a good time to meet other Reaction developers.
I need to take a vacation. I think I'm going to head down there for the next one.
Yeah, so if anybody is trying to start a Reaction meetup or doing anything like that and wants some help or wants to maybe find other Reaction developers in your area, definitely let us know in the Gitter channel, and we'll help you do that. So yeah, those are my updates. Let's see. I can move on to updates from the open source community, actually. So one thing you may have noticed is that we've been, here at Reaction, we've been kind of moving meteor versions. And one of our goals with Reaction is that we always want to be on top of the latest Meteor versions. And we also want to be really active members of the Meteor community. So if you we noticed that reaction was slowing down with, I think, the latest version. I can't keep them straight anymore.
1.5.2 with no subversions on that.
Yeah, and there was like quite a few people talking about this in like the Reaction Gator channels and Meteor and other places, but it's a really good idea if you ever have a performance issue like that to report it directly to Meteor, because as soon as we reported it, people from the Meteor core team responded and new versions came up. And so kind of our open source lesson learned of the month there is that if you're experiencing Meteor issues, definitely make an issue, show your like the stack trace or performance trace of what it's looking like so that we can get new versions out. And that kind of goes with Reaction too, and any open source project that you're working on.
And if you're not sure, is this a Meteor issue or is this a Reaction issue, you can feel free to post a bug, especially if it's something that you don't see in the Reaction issues. Feel free to post a bug in the Reaction repo. Mm-hmm. And what we'll do is if we realize that this is not really a core Reaction issue, but a core Meteor issue, is we'll tag the issue with Meteor. And typically that's a good indication of, hey, we should probably take this over to Meteor and make some noise over there. And we are one of the bigger open source Meteor communities. So I think, if enough of us make noise, they start fixing things.
Yep. So, yeah. I wanted to do some community shoutouts for some people that have had pull requests merged over the past 2 weeks. These are really, I usually try to link all of them because we've had so many this past 2 weeks, I just chose 4. But thanks to, I think this is Lorenzo, or maybe not, for adding units of measure. You now have 2 more units of measure, UOL and base UOL, which I never even heard about. And now there's a keyboard shortcut to get into edit mode. If you're like me and when you're posting a product and you're constantly changing like one thing at a time and then trying to preview it and going back to edit, it'd be really nice to have a edit mode keyboard shortcut. So somebody added that. And so now I think the keyboard shortcut is Option E. If you click Option E, you should be able to get in and out of edit mode when you're making a product. There's another pull request from Patrick Tavares that moves, it moves the app container into its own component so that you can replace it. The docs for this are coming soon, but you could see an example of it here.
This is a great pull request. They're all great. I shouldn't overemphasize one. This one allows you to essentially replace top level components so you can redesign your whole app rather than only kind of working within the Reaction layout. I think this permits you to replace essentially the whole app container.
Yeah. So it takes advantage of our new Reaction component library that allows you to replace a registered React component with a totally different one. And this way it's easier to get new components into your app without touching core code too, which is always a good thing. It'll help you kind of keep versions up on Reaction. And the last PR that I wanted to touch was another one from Lorenzo, router performance fix to include the theme in routes context. So the layout theme is now included in each route when the router initializes all routes. Before, you would have to use the get route layout method. So that's also in there. Yeah. That's it for me for community updates. This is also a time for anybody from the community to talk about or highlight or kind of do a shout out for any plugins that they're working on. So if you're working on any plugins, let us know and want other people to help or test or anything like that, let us know in the chat or Gitter. Last time in our call, we had Daniel Honig from Boomer Digital in New York show a kind of a work in progress for the plugin that he's working on.
Which is for Stripe subscriptions.
Yep. So that is all up on GitHub too, so you can check it there.
Yeah, if you've got any plugins or other kind of Reaction extensions that you're working on, we'd love to hear about those. We've got a question we're looking to ask this week as well. Can I go ahead and ask the weekly question, Michiko?
Yeah.
So one thing that we're curious about is, as you guys are developing shops, what type of Git or version control workflow are you guys using with you? If it's just you, like how do you build your shop? But if you've got a team, how are you structuring that for your team? Do you guys use sub modules? Do you use a single mono repo? Do you use something else? But how do you structure your app plus the kind of core Reaction? We're trying to understand how everybody's doing that. There's one vote for Git sub modules.
Awesome. So does that mean that when you're doing that, so the reason why this question came up was because as a part of my personal documentation projects, I'm going through the Reaction plugin tutorial that Brent wrote and documenting my whole process of how that's been, and that's here. And I'm gonna document also. I'm gonna push up the code and talk about everything that I've done. And as I was doing that, one thing to know when you're working on a plugin is that when you're in the main Reaction repository, we have in the Git ignore, we have the custom folder ignored. And so any changes you're making in any of your custom plugins won't be you won't be seeing those changes in Git when you're using that. And so that's why
One other thing that's dangerous there that I've run into a few times is in that custom folder, it is Git ignored by default. And some code editors, Atom is one of them, won't search. If you use a fuzzy search, they won't search things that are Git ignored by default, which is super handy to not search through all of your node modules. And something that you can change in your settings. But as you're developing custom plugins, it's worth noting that if you're searching for something and your custom plugin isn't showing up in your search, you might need to go and add that folder manually to your fuzzy search, or some other way to make sure that it's being shown up in your results.
Yeah. So when we say submodules, I think that what we mean by that is that you would have, or that's how I imagine it, is that you would have one tab in terminal that's running Reaction, and that's where you can keep, you could change Reaction branches. Let's say you want to move from master to marketplace, or to work off of release 1.4 or whatever. So you'd have one terminal for that, and then you would have another terminal tab for any plugins that you're working on at the time. And that's the kind of I guess format that I've been using in testing.
To clarify for everyone, a submodule is a little different than just checking out a repo. A submodule is something that when you do a git pull, Git will go and retrieve the submodules that you've added remotely. And so it doesn't really require any kind of a different development environment. You actually would act like you're just developing core, but your submodule is located in a remote repo. That is actually sort of well, it's a pain in the ass that most developers don't like to do, and that most people who use Git don't like to recommend, because submodules have always led to irritating issues. So, most people are, even though they know they can do submodules, they're going to do everything they can to try to avoid using submodules, which is why we end up with the questions of what are the best strategies. So in avoidance of submodules is really the question that most people are trying to answer. And I would suggest that the right answer there is that you could go ahead and remove the git ignore in the custom directory and code away. But just remember, there's nothing else in the custom directory, so don't be committing that back to core.
Yeah, we don't want those commits.
Yeah, and I think that other people will say, well, yeah, but I'm touching core. Well, you're not supposed to be, so I can't help you.
Yeah.
That would be part 2 of that, because if you start touching core, submodules and nothing else is going to help you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Josh is right.
Yep.
Exactly. So I would imagine if you're working on a team and your team has several custom plugins, then you would have different repositories for all those different plugins, and you would want your whole team to be kind of Git pulling and making sure they're getting the latest of every plugin.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, because the real sort of question there is like, it really has to do with touching core.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that a lot of people think, oh, well, we had to touch core. I hear this all the time. We had to touch core. But I will say that there are some fairly large projects out there that I know of that not everyone knows about that are using Reaction that are exclusively a single plugin and with never touched core and have no issues upgrading to the next version of Reaction.
Yeah.
But that requires some real discipline.
Yeah, so that is another option if you are working on a team. Instead of having, let's say, 10 or 5 different plugins, you could just have one plugin that you make all changes to. And so it make it a little bit easier to have the whole team on, one thing. And it would also make it a lot easier to keep updating Reaction or testing Reaction against that one package on different versions of Reaction. So I'm really glad to hear that people are using Git submodules for their packages. And hopefully that's been a good experience for you, and that's made it easier to keep up with the latest Reaction. So yeah. Another thing I just wanted to mention is that the whole dev team here at Reaction has gone through our Reaction code style guide and added recommendations, not just for naming files and folders. Let me link that. But also we've got some great kind of guide and recommendations for when how to name your methods, variables, and when to use parentheses for method arguments, and how to work with React and things like that. So check that out. We'll definitely be linking to that in any kind of syntax or naming changes that we recommend in pull requests. So that's there. And yeah, I think maybe we should open it up to community call questions and answer sessions now.
Sure.
I've linked to a few. There's been like a lot of great discussion in Gitter, and so I've linked to a few in the agenda. Somebody asks, how does Reaction layout work? And then if you want to read the answer, I've linked to the exact response to that in Gitter. How are user permission groups created? Because that's something that we've added in Marketplace. You can have, instead of having to specify all the exact permissions for every single user individually, you can use groups. So that answer is there too. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A box, but I think we would prefer if you just drop them into the chat so everybody could see it. Yeah. Were there any questions, Spencer or anybody, that you've noticed that we've been getting a lot in Gitter or GitHub?
One other, I guess, frequent conversation that I've had in Gitter is kind of for when you're creating a plugin, or if you're creating marketplace functionality, or if you're creating some type of functionality for multiple shops, should I be creating separate methods for those shops, like update merchant shop versus update regular shop or something like that. And so the Art Limes team has been making a lot of progress on kind of, their version of the marketplace, and they've been contributing an enormous amount of that code back to us lately, which has been awesome. But in general, my answer is we'd like to avoid kind of specific marketplace functionality when at all possible. There's some things where we're not going to be able to avoid having kind of a marketplace version, but in general, something like update shop is generic enough that rather than having, update marketplace shop and update shop, we should have just update shop. And that update shop should be able to take, enough parameters that it can update any kind of shop. And it should be secure enough that it can check, the permissions and kind of know the context of the request and say, yes, I'm going to update this shop, or no, sorry, you don't have the permissions to update this shop. But in general, we don't want to be creating a style of code where for every regular or for every method, there's a multi-shop version of that method. And for every method, there's a kind of multi-user version of that method, or a version of that method that does some other purpose. So as we move forward, we want to make sure that we're kind of updating our core methods. And a lot of them already are marketplace ready. But, as you guys run into roadblocks, those are types of things where it's like, if you feel like you need to create your own unique method for something that already exists in core, maybe one, you're not using the core method correctly, or two, it's possible that maybe the core method doesn't really support your use case. And so, file an issue in GitHub or start a chat on Gitter, and let's understand that use case and figure out how can we use this core method to do what you're trying to do. And then kind of as a last resort, I think we would create an additional version of that method. But I think that to me is something that is probably less necessary than you would think. And, sometimes maybe we do need to update a core method to, I guess, resolve another use case that perhaps we hadn't thought of.
Awesome. Don't think we've gotten any other questions. So I guess we could just, I don't know, ask and answer our own questions. I'm just going through and reading kind of Gitter stuff. I think the biggest thing for me was trying to see if people are actually using sub modules or not. So I'm excited to check that out. And yeah, are there any other big kind of code changes in Marketplace that people should know about? I know there's a lot.
Well, there's so many code changes in Marketplace.
Yeah.
That's something, as we move closer to a release, I need to make sure that the release notes are actually going to be reasonable. This 1.5 release is so big that I really need to start collating those release notes now so that I make sure we've got everything.
That too.
That there's just docs in general. We're going to need some help. They need to be reviewed from top to bottom, and
right.
How much of that process is going on. So,
and just a reminder to our community that a great place to get started if you don't feel comfortable contributing code yet, or if you're kind of just getting into Reaction, if you're going through tutorials and you find things that either are broken or don't work like you think they should work, and you can figure out how they should work, some of our docs are old enough that they actually tell you the wrong thing to do, and so we welcome doc PRs just as much as code PRs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the Reaction docs all live in GitHub, so this process for committing it, or the process for making a pull request is exactly the same. And our example plugin is also on GitHub, and our CLI is also on GitHub. It's all out there in the open, so if you have any questions on any of those.
Has the example plugin been updated? Because I know there was a fair amount of frustration around the documentation on the example plugin, and if we're directing people there, I hope. Yeah,
I haven't updated the actual plugin. I've started new one, basically where I've been documenting how I've been working on it. Let's see. And
there was a bug with it that actually a community member submitted a fix for it. So now it actually works with the current React rewrite stuff.
yep. So yeah, that's been great. And I'm gonna like with my kind of sticky footer plugin, because that's like a very common question we get is like, how do I make a sticky footer? So I'm just gonna make a plugin that just does that and with screenshots and stuff. So and a little bit more step-by-step guide. So yeah. There will also be a lot of kind of, with this new marketplace branch, there are going to be a lot of new features for people that use, not just developers, but also for all store operators that use Reaction. And so user guide docs are coming for those. So that's things like I talked about earlier, adding user permission groups. We're also getting changes, thanks to Eric, on how the PDP, the product detail page edit variant side panel works, like a few UI updates in that. And so working on the user guide docs for that as soon as that's out. And so, yeah, that's sort of what's on my plate.
Well, since we don't have any new community questions, I think we should wrap this up. So thanks for hanging out with us again today, guys. We always appreciate you guys taking some of your day and spending it with us.
Yep. And as always, the call will be recorded and we'll post the video and audio from that up on Gitter and our agenda. So if there's anything you wanted to come back to, you can always do that. So yeah, thanks.
Great.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.